We have Ms. Marvi Memon with us, who is member National Assembly and Chairman Benazir Income Support Program. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your presence. We are really honored. We have a very esteemed panel today. Starting from the far, we have Mr. Mazhar Siraj Saab, who's heading the Social Protection Unit at DFID, Pakistan. He's done extensive work in this area. We'll really look forward to listening to him. Then we have Mr. Ali Khizr Saab, who's heading Business Recorder Research. Again, somebody who has done extensive research in this area. We'll have Dr. Shahryar Khan, who's a researcher at STPI, a research fellow, senior research fellow, and will also be giving his presentation on this subject. We'll also have our executive director, STPI, Dr. Abid Qayyum Sulehri, who will be giving his interventions here. From the UNDP Pakistan, we are joined by the assistant country director, Mr. Shakil Ahmed, who will be bringing in his team's perspective as well as what they are doing in helping the provincial SDG units as well. We are really grateful that this panel has a cooperation with our partner, which is Overseas Development Institute London. And we are grateful to Amina Khan, who has joined us all the way from London and, of course, designed the background around this session, really thought through the key messages that should be discussed over here. And Amna is a senior researcher with ODI. We are grateful to our moderator for today, Mr. Muhammad Ali Kamal Saab, who's with the Planning Commission. He's currently looking after the Center for SDGs. He's an economic advisor over there. So, Ali Saab, without ado, probably, because you are the moderator, I'll leave the session to you, please.
Assalamu alaikum, and thanks, Waqar, for the introductions. Without wasting any time, we'll start the session. And before starting the session, I just want to introduce what is leaving no one behind. It implies basically that we will address extreme poverty situation and reduce the inequalities vertically as well as horizontally. So we will have 3 presenters followed by 2 discussants and then question answer sessions with the intervention with the comments of Ms. Marvi Memon as well. So Waqar has said already that this session is organized by the ODI, Overseas Development Institute, and STPI together, and this is a powerful tool to frame and implement future development policies. And among other SDGs components, it is one of the main components which is very important and gives the opportunity to everyone to perform in the economy and as well as socially. So after this, we will have in the session, there will be 3 speakers and 2 discussants, as I said, and I would like to invite our first speaker, who will talk on the definitional and practical aspects of the topic. It's Ms. Amina Khan, who is a senior research officer at the Growth, Poverty and Inequality Program at the Overseas Development Institute as an international development policy researcher. Since 2009, she writes mainly on poverty, inclusive growth, urbanization, data development in low and middle income countries, and the sustainable development goals. Prior to joining ODI, Ms. Amna served as Senior Research Fellow at the Mehboob-ul Haq Institute, Lahore, a think tank focused on the human development challenges in South Asia. She holds an MSc in Foreign Service from Georgetown University with a specialization in international development and BSc Honors in Economics from LUMS. She is a Fulbright Fellow, scholar, and is fluent in French, Urdu, Hindi, and Bengali. So over to you, Ms. Amna.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to thank you for being here. I hope this would be an excellent session. We welcome all the feedback that you could provide to ODI and SDPI on this particular topic. I'd like to thank everyone that has joined us as panelists and speakers. I'd like to thank the moderator. Most of all, I'd like to thank Asif Javed and Dr. Vakar for helping organize the second series of ODI and SDPI's presentations at the Sustainable Development Conference. There are a couple of things I'd like to highlight today. And the focus of the presentation, as you can see, is about leaving no one behind. And it's about a powerful new development narrative for South Asia. And that's the point that I'd like to take you through as this journey over this presentation. Now, as you know, the rallying cry of the Sustainable Development Goals is to leave no one behind by 2030. The concept appears in the SDG outcome document in this form. As we embark on this great collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind, recognizing that the dignity of the human person is fundamental. We wish to see the goals and targets met for all nations and peoples and for all segments of society. And we will endeavor to reach the furthest behind first. I hope you will remember some of the highlights of this particular statement because it speaks very closely to what's happening in South Asia today. Amid widespread progress, many people remain marginalized and extremely poor. This may be due to where they live or aspects of who they are, such as whether they have a disability, what their migratory status is, or their age, religion, gender, or ethnicity. These inequalities can be overlooked when progress is measured in averages across the entire population. So understanding where there are gaps and taking early and sustained action to address them is critical if we are to make real this leave no one behind agenda. And in South Asia's context, the Leave No One Behind agenda will offer a powerful and practical approach to accelerate progress explicitly for the people with the worst development outcomes. So today, using insights from ODI's latest research, this presentation is going to capture two key aspects of this particular agenda. One is definitional, the second is practical. Now, the definitional aspects of Leave No One Behind will relate to improving the welfare of society, ending extreme poverty in all its forms, reducing inequalities, and addressing discriminatory barriers, like I said, which could arise from social identity or geography. The practical aspects deal with prioritizing and fast-tracking action for the furthest behind, and especially before South Asian countries cross the first 1,000 days mark of their endorsement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I'd like to give you some examples of groups that are left behind in the world today. 15% of the world's population are living with a disability. That's 1 billion people. 312 million workers earn less than $1.90 each day, and nearly 500 million workers earn between $1.90 and $3.10 a day. 720 million women have been married before the age of 18. This compares with 156 million men. 46% of people who live in rural areas in the world account for 80% of the world's poor. Now, relating to the definitional aspects of Leave No One Behind, being left behind often results from a marginalized social identity. I'll talk you through some of the examples from around the world and then talk you through an example from South Asia. Now, being left behind would look at, for example, belonging to a marginalized racial, ethnic, or indigenous group and is consistently associated with greater deprivation. In 2004 and 2012, Afro-Brazilians remained 1.6 times as likely to be poor as white Brazilians. In Guatemala, in 2000 and in 2011, an indigenous household was up to 2.5 times as likely to be poor as a non-indigenous household. In Vietnam, an ethnic minority-headed household was 3.2 times as likely to be poor as an ethnic majority-headed household in 2006 and 3.5 times as likely in 2011. In Bangladesh, de jure female-headed households, which means those with the legal and customary status of being a head of household, including widows, women who have been separated from partners, or those who have never married. These female-headed households were nearly twice as likely to be poor than the de facto female-headed households, which basically mean heads who are married and whose husbands may have migrated for work, for example. And so that difference is about 1.5 times likelihood in 2011. The other thing to note about Leave No One Behind is these overlapping inequalities, and that can amplify the experience of being left behind. So these multiple overlapping inequalities would be, for example, being female, living in a rural area, and belonging to a marginalized ethnic group. Analysis of 16 countries showed that the poorest women from disadvantaged ethnic groups had particularly poor education and health outcomes. In 11 countries, they had the fewest years of education, and in 14, the highest share of child deaths. In Ethiopia, 15% of rural Somali women were likely to have completed primary school, compared with 77% of urban women from other ethnic groups. In the same study by ODI of who is being left behind in Asia, we looked at the example of Bangladesh, and that's where we found that in Bangladesh, the de facto female-headed households belonging to the Muslim majority were 2.3 times as likely as de jure female-headed households of religious minorities to have sanitation in 2005, and this ratio increased considerably to 2.8 in 2010. Now, urban-rural disparities coupled with overlapping inequalities is a key aspect that also hurts Pakistan today. In one study of ODIs looking at leaving no one behind, a critical path for the first 1,000 days of the SDGs, insights from focus group discussions highlighted a form of exclusion in urban Pakistan. Although migrants from Machar in Bangladesh have been settled in Karachi for around 50 years, none of the women have a national identity card. Some men now have their card, but often have to pay exorbitant amounts of money for this to the local national registration office. The women rarely leave the community because they have little desire to, in the face of discrimination. One participant in the women's focus group spoke of going to government offices in groups because of the verbal harassment her community endured. Her statement, which I will read, demonstrates further what it means to be left behind in this context by the government. She says, "Can you just ask them why they hate us so much? We migrated so many years ago, as did most of the people who live in this city. Why are we singled out? What have we done to the government that everything is a hassle for us? That our men are arrested for no reason every now and then? That we have to pay 3 times as much for our electricity, which is officially installed, and that they can never tell us why our bills are always so much higher when that's not the case for the people living next to our community who have fridges, air conditioners that we don't? What is it about being ethnically Bengali that is such a problem for everyone in this country?" In terms of geography, the one point that I'd like to highlight beyond the context of the quote that I mentioned in the context of Karachi is look at what a poverty map can do. A poverty map can illustrate what needs to be made. And that would, for example, amplify the experiences of people being left behind as we delay, as governments fail to take action within the first 3 years of the SDGs. In the context of South Asia, for example, we look at what it would take to bring down to zero the average rate of reduction in the percentage of youth not in education, employment, or training. They're the so-called NEETs of South Asia. And here what you will see is, had we started in 2015, the annual rate of reduction would be 12.6%. In 2018, which is around the corner, if we were to start, the annual change would need to be 15.6%. But let's just realize that what if we just wait for this in 2027, then that rate of reduction would need to be 49.2%, and that's formidable. Now, one of the key things about putting the furthest behind first is because if we start on them late, there is a likelihood that the best of groups will continue to excel, and the poorest of the poor and the worst of groups will continue to live in extreme poverty and face several discriminations and deprivations. Now, this is a concept known as progressive universalism, the approach of putting the worst off first. And unless we think about this, the existing gap between the worst off and the best off will worsen. The other thing to note is that ambitious policies can yield rapid improvements. A lot of things can be done within the areas of service delivery and connectivity, better anti-discrimination laws and legal reforms, including more inclusive institutions. And it doesn't take too long to get these things done. I can give you the example of India, where in 2005, the government initiated the Bharat Nirman flagship rural infrastructure program, which aimed to connect every community with 1,000 or more people and 500 people in the case of hilly, tribal, and desert areas with all-weather roads. And by 2009, more than 70% of the target communities were connected. The other important thing to know is focused investments in left-behind groups can accelerate progress. If we focus on them first, there's good value for money. There is a very strong case for the returns on investment if we focus on them first, relative to non-poor groups, which might be easiest to get out of extreme poverty and deprivation. Now, what have we talked about in the last 10 or 12 odd minutes? The moderator would be able to confirm. Are some of the key aspects of looking at Leave No One Behind in the South Asian context. We look through the definitional aspects, we look through the practical aspects. On the definitional aspect side, we laid emphasis to groups that are denied a lot of rights and privileges and freedoms just because of their social identity and because of where they live. In the 21st century, and especially now, we can't afford to let this happen. We need to speak out and to say with confidence through evidence-based policy making where exactly we need to put our investment, our money, our resources, and our attention to first. The final thing I'd like to say is that we're in an environment today where conditions are very tense. And a lot of people will continue to be left behind by some governments who don't want to talk about identity-based disadvantages. It's not politically savvy or intelligent to talk about it. It takes a lot of guts, it takes a lot of courage to actually go out there and speak out and take responsibility for other people's actions or other governments' actions in previous tenures to explain the situation that we are where we are today in South Asia. And it's very important that if we don't tip the balance in favor of the worst off, there's a high risk that this will come and bite us so hard in the coming years that from there's no return. And as we noted yesterday at Pakistan at 70, and then we also had a session on Pakistan at 100, it's now where we need to act. We've got all the evidence, we've got the knowledge, we've got the expertise. There isn't a better time. And I hope we can all agree on this and talk more about Leave No One Behind in the rest of the session. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Amna, for a very good presentation on the aspects, the definitional aspects and the practical aspects of Leave No One Behind. And when we talk about Leave No One Behind, it follows egalitarianism, which says that giving minimum living standard to everyone, which is Islamic principle as well. And she's rightly mentioned that we may need ambitious policies to overcome these problems and implement the Leave No One Behind agenda, and which needs governance issues as well. Good governance is the key, and the next presentation by Dr. Shehran Khan Toru is basically the presence of social equalities in youth in conjunction with governance and ethnic fragmentation. Dr. Saab is a research fellow at the STPI. He holds a PhD from University of Bath, UK. His doctoral thesis examines problems of governance in Pakistan from a non-normative perspective through an ethnography of 3 distinct case studies in our district of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. His research interests are governance and service delivery in social, political, and institutional contexts. At STPI, he is involved in research projects concerning youth and social cohesion, horizontal inequalities in youth, social protection schemes, better governance index, and SDGs. Dr. Khan has published articles on dynamics of access and service delivery, local governance and domestic water supply, and development policy failure in Pakistan. So over to you, sir. And may I request my presenter to keep your presentation between 10 to 12 minutes so that we can have ample time for question and answer session after that.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. My presentation today is based on a research study that we did 7-8 months back, which looks at social inequalities and intervening forms of exclusion in youth, dangerous outcomes. Now, before I indulge into my empirical study, I would like to just set the context of the study. When we look at the poverty context, it talks about poverty reduction from MDGs to SDGs. So in the first MDGs, we had to eliminate poverty by half. And then the MDGs explicitly focused on poverty reduction, absolute terms, and between 2015 and 2015, which were underpinned by guiding principles: hunger, education, and health. Progress on MDGs, however, across South Asia and African countries was limited. According to UN 2012, 80% extreme poverty is still found in South Asia and African region. As you already saw the presentation of Amna, she gave an extensive presentation of how the geography of poverty is located in different parts of Asia as well as in African states. And transition from MDGs to SDGs remains essentially focused on poverty, a reduction in both absolute and relative terms. So essentially, when you look at across SDGs, which are, there are 17 goals, there's only one goal, which is poverty, and you have different means of achieving poverty in terms of social services provision, in terms of climate change, and of course, there's a very strong element of institutional performance and governance. So what are the challenges now in the pretext, particularly they are still persistent in South Asia? Rising inequalities among groups and population based on geography, ethnicity, and gender. Social exclusion, identity-based discrimination, lack of access to state institutions, employment and resources, social inequalities, and its implications for youth in particular, has recently gained importance, especially in fragile countries. Now I will come to my actual study. Before, I wanted to set the context that poverty in terms of exclusion is an extremely important dynamics of development that we are all faced with. Now, this study looked at exploring social inequalities in youth between ages 18 to 29, residing in Zandani, which is a union council of D.I. Khan district. And so these were basically the objectives of the study. And the implications of social inequalities combined with institutional discrimination, selective employment, and social marginalization of youth, understanding social exclusion from the perspective of state legitimacy. Now I'll come to the last point when I conclude my presentation towards the end, but these were basically the objectives of the study, that we want to look at how social exclusion in youth affects youth perceptions with the state of social provision, social services, and how, what can be the implications of different forms of exclusion affecting the youth. Now, how do we classify the dynamics of exclusion? Basically, what we explored in this particular type of research, that there are different forms of exclusion. So exclusion cannot be only based on exclusion from social services, but also it has an institutional dynamics, which is non-transparency in the provision of jobs. And also there is an element of ethnicity, which is ethnic discrimination. So in this particular study, we looked at and explored empirically with the help of analytical literature that in youth, there were different forms of exclusion intervening and also affecting the youth overall ambitions towards, how they looked at the state, what they were experiencing in terms of social services, education and health and so on. What we found were, there's unequal access to social services, for example, and when we asked them about the job provision and access to job, they talked about selective employment on the basis of patronage, on the basis of corruption, and also there is ethnic discrimination, which also came really, was highlighted when we talked about, how you were excluding particular constituencies more excluded as compared to other exclusion. So the methodology for this particular research was a review of literature on social inequality, social exclusion, and theories of conflict in youth particularly. Secondly, perception and satisfaction survey was undertaken between 18 to 29 ages of youth on the provision of social services, health, education, water supply, and sanitation. And the survey was administered in 400 randomly selected male and female youth. And on top of that, we held key informal interviews with diverse actors in the community, police officials, local politicians, university professors, and district officials. And while we held these interviews, the following three questions were deeply explored. The first one is dissatisfaction of youth concerning access to jobs, health and education, and water and sanitation, why religion or ethnic identities matter, and lastly, how political elites pursue political agendas such as securing access to state services or commanding constituencies. Now, if you look at this particular graph, we have here education, health, access to clean drinking water, and sanitation. And these were the responses of the youth that we selected, and you can appreciate that dissatisfaction steadily rises from education towards the health and access to clean drinking water, and of course sanitation. There were high dissatisfaction with these services. So what does that really mean? Usually poverty reduction, when we talk about poverty, is usually calculated on the basis of the position of an individual in the society on certain indices, but it rarely looks at how this poverty can be affected by inequalities which are within groups and across the groups. So that's why we argue that severe inequalities exist between male and female, and that is really a cause of dissatisfaction when we ask them about how do you really feel about the service provision in your community. So it is not poverty is basically a multidimensional phenomenon which is not really vertical within the household, but it's also across within the household, within groups of communities. And their dissatisfaction were related to a non-existing existence of public and private schools in the vicinity that we had resided, inadequate health facilities. They had to travel a long distance to commute to health facilities and hospitals, and of course lack of access to clean drinking water, and poor sanitation facilities were basically highlighted as a key cause of dissatisfaction of youth that we interviewed and surveyed. Now, this is the key area which concerns, how institutions affect youth in terms of exclusion, and how ethnicity affects exclusion in this particular study. So we basically argue that poverty demands a multidimensional aspect when it comes to analysis of poverty, and that cannot be really quantified in terms of quantitatively, but it also has an effect when we look at the life of the people, particularly when you try to look at access to social services and, of course, satisfaction of those services amongst the youth. Now, the prevalence of poverty can be further exacerbated when you have employment opportunities are limited, when people are they graduate and they try to access employment, and then they find it difficult for the state to disperse employment on the basis of transparency, and that is essentially what we call a transition from to adulthood is essentially blocked. So if a person is qualified, he or she has a qualification and aspire a higher employment and unable to do that is basically is quite you are segmenting that particular constituency, and also the dissatisfaction raises more. So youth are unemployed because the state ignores merit in appointments. Jobs are granted to those who use extra legal means, for example, corruption, and to those who use political connections. And lastly, the youth in Zandani is not just subjected to social inequalities, but also we also found that institutional exclusion happens, religious exploitation in this particular community, and that also what emerges from this study that ethnicity and religion can also be the cause of dissatisfaction, can also be a cause of segmentation of this particular youth. Now, this research has strong implications. These are just prospective implications of this study. It's not necessarily that they may happen, but based on this research, there can be three strong implications for youth. The first is ethnic conflict. So on the basis of dissatisfaction with services and also exclusion from jobs and ethnicity and religious aspects of it, there can be ethnic conflict in Zandani, and that can be intensified by fueling ethnic discrimination. The second one is political violence with horizontal as well as ethnic groups inequalities and selective employment. The youth may be inadvertently indulged in political violence directed against the state. And lastly, non-coercive indoctrination, foreclosure of alternatives. When the youth do not have alternatives to pursue, they might be lured by non-state actors and to meet their basic requirements, for example. And that can be socially deprived, and discontented youth fall prey to coercive indoctrination. Now, these concluding remarks, I just wanted to take a little bit of time, is when we talk about development, when we look at SDGs, which is such as a huge agenda, and we constantly reiterate about how to achieve SDGs, I think that social inequalities can really hinder egalitarian policies, and when we try to bridge the gaps between the well-off and the poor. And of course, all these have implications for the state, how the state becomes legitimate in the eyes of the people they are commanding. And most of these dissatisfaction studies, they are dissatisfied because even if the social services improve, their dissatisfaction with the state would continue to exist. And the reason for that is they look at the state from the perspective of a Weberian kind of an understanding that the state would deliver services on the basis of transparency, meritocracy, but in Pakistan and across South Asia that really do not happen, because you have non-state actors, you have communities, you have ethnicity, you have other political interests which try to obscure the real intent of the state, try to disperse social services. And when we talk about when we look at SDGs, such a huge complex agenda, I think that a lot can be achieved by improving the governance and the governance capabilities required for a state like Pakistan to have non-discriminatory provision of social services, education to employment. Ultimately, we have to move towards transparency and the good governance agenda. Without this good governance agenda, there can be persistent problem of inequalities, there can be problem of poverty, which is a vicious cycle that you have to break somewhere, and that may not be necessarily attacking the corruption aspect of it, because you will have more opposition to that in terms of trying to improve accountability between the service providers and the constituencies that the political leaders try to establish. So it is a very, you can intervene this particular aspect of state legitimacy by looking at how the state provides services and looking at how the recipients of that services are, making reference to the state in terms of access to social services, access to jobs, and access to other resources that are dispensed by a state. And of course, towards the end, that state of legitimacy that the state tries to establish is basically rooted in the quality of governance that I strongly propose in my research, and I strongly propose when I talk to the officials, and I strongly propose when I go to the communities and talk to the people. One missing element in this entire discourse of development is the communities, at times really passive. So the state cannot do everything. The community needs to be, engaged in the entire SDGs process, particularly by adopting innovative ways of improving access to social services. So the state cannot be solely responsible for the service provision. It is theoretically, but practically in the context of Pakistan, the communities have to adopt and come up with solutions which can complement the services of the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharia. And the bottom line from the presentation, which I can take, is that the inequalities of different forms, social, political, ethnical, and involvement of communities is the key. So moving forward, when we talk about the social inequalities, there is the health inequality, there is the education inequality. And our next presenter, Ali Khizr, who is head of research at the Business Recorder, he will be presenting on the provision of affordable food and micronutrients for building a productive workforce, which is very important because when we talk about the leave no one behind thing, there are several, we have 44% people stunted in Pakistan, and there are several surveys who are saying this. So it will be an interesting presentation by Ali Khizr Saab, and he established Business Recorder Research in May 2009, and also an independent analyst wing of the premier financial daily of Pakistan, Business Recorder. As the founding head of this department, he has guided research and analysis of various sectors of the economy, from corporate earnings and performance of companies to macroeconomic occurrences and challenges. Leading team of the research at the Business Recorder, he has amalgamated responses from key stakeholders such as private sector, elected representatives, civil bureaucracy, and independent experts on the issues such as employment generation, addressing the country's energy challenges, spurring economic growth, and boosting the competitive of Pakistani companies in international markets for the exports purpose as well. He has been involved in raising awareness and spurring debate regarding these and other pressing national issues. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for the invitation, STPI and the esteemed panel. These are the experts who have indulged into the research of the area of social inequality and what's happening to the marginalized. I like to narrate a story. Where I would connect this that the marginal affordability of poor in terms of having food has declined over the past decade or so, and that has impacted on the economic progression of the country. As the labor productivity is gone, the social inequality has increased, and there are two issues which he talked about. Is that there's a micronutrient issue and there's a macronutrient issue, all that. So since this is a 10-12 minute presentation, so I didn't include the micronutrient issue is there, so I tried to focus more on the macronutrient issue and the pricing factor on that. So if we get down to the first slide, please, it's from here, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So there's a myth that no one sleeps, without food in Pakistan. I mean, there's lots of philanthropy and charity going on and all that, but still many people have issues with hunger, and they have issues of malnutrition. So there are ample studies which are there to tell that yes, the people who are suffering from stunting, the kids are suffering from stunting and wasting. The adults are suffering from malnutrition, and women are suffering from anemia and many other issues. And they are linked to many factors. As I told you, they're the factor of the macronutrient and the micronutrient. And the macronutrient is simply that people can't afford food. And that's what I try to tell the story, that the affordability of people of Pakistan, especially the poorest and the lower middle class, has been adversely affected in the last decade or so. And that I try to connect with the fiscal policies and the other policies the country had adopted back in 2008, and how is it impacting today, and how is it going to impact the future generation. So, so if we see the poverty line of Pakistan, now what I'm trying to talk about is something which is ironic. I'm going to talk about a paradox, and which is going to be unfolded as I go through my presentation in this. If we see the poverty line in Pakistan, the poverty is on the decline, whichever year you take it. I mean, there was a lot of debate on the poverty going down a few years back, that when they came up with the number that poverty has came down to 9.3% in 2014-15. But the issue was that no, poverty is high. So what they did is they came back over okay, what we were measuring the poverty in the past was a different base. So they readjusted the base and said that, okay, poverty is now not 9%, it's 29%, somewhere 30%, but it was 51% back in 2008. So instead of 25% on the new poverty, on the old poverty line. So whatever the lines you see, old poverty line, new poverty line, or if you see the multi-dimension poverty, the graph is falling. So it's about tweaking numbers. You can change the parameters. So numbers, you can play with the numbers. But whatever it is, it's falling. That one thing is for sure. So that's good. This means that if the poverty is falling, this means people could afford more food, they would be more aware, they would have an access to good food, they would have an access to nutrition and all that, so they probably would be improving on their health indicators. Is that the case? That I'll try to tell you that. And I'm not trying to compare it with the developed world. I'm trying to compare it with the countries which are similar, which we have a similar socio-economic background. And we were together 70 years back. So I try to compare the numbers with India and Bangladesh. So if you see this, the poverty, if you see this, if you go to this next presentation, if you see that poverty, national poverty line, and if you see the purchasing power parity below $1.9, so the green is Pakistan, the blue is India, and the red is Bangladesh. And if you see that Pakistan is far better in terms of the purchasing power parity on 1.9. And so this would imply that people have more money in hand, they would be spending more on food, they would be having good food and everything. Is that the case? Let us find out this. But if you see the nutrition indicators, they are slow to respond. I mean, there's an improvement, there's a decline in poverty as what I've shown in the first slide. Okay, let's see this one slide before. There's a decline in poverty, whatever line you use. Yeah, we all can see that. So, but when you see that, see this green line, that's Pakistan. So, I mean, if you see the percentage of population undernourished, that has remained stagnated since 2000. That has remained stagnated for the past 15 years. That has remained stagnated since this millennium. That has remained stagnated since we are talking about the sustainability. Since that has remained stagnated since we talk about the reduction of poverty. You talk about the sustainable goals. How can you sustain on anything if your percentage of the population is malnourished and it's not declining? So if the percentage is static, the population is growing, this means there are more people coming, there are more undernourished people now. That's a big tragedy this country is facing. And when you see this, when you compare this number with India, and when you compare this number with Bangladesh, you could see the red in Bangladesh. They were so high in malnutrition. I mean, we were together at some point of time in 70s, the Bangladesh people were much more vulnerable to health indicators, or their nutrition value they were intaking was much lower than the people in the West Pakistan, which is Pakistan today. But look at now, where is Bangladesh today? How they came down in the last 15 years or so, and where we have remained. And you could see the number of an example in India. So the nutrition indicators are not improving in Pakistan, they're improving in India and Bangladesh. And the irony is that the poverty is lower in Pakistan than India and Bangladesh. I fail to understand that. I fail to comprehend that. There are people from UNDP, there are people from DFID, there are people from the Mavi, this is from Benazir Income Support Program. They would be able to tell better, but this is something which is incomprehensible. This is something I can't comprehend how this is happening. So if you dig more into this, there is another problem. Here you go. That's about the stunting. Yeah, this about stunting. If you go back, yeah. Yeah. So the stunting is a problem with the children. You know, and if they're underweight, they're under height, you know, that would mean that the progression would be low when they grow up. They'll be unhealthy mentally and physically. So they rather than becoming an asset, rather than becoming an asset in a booming population, rather than becoming a youth, what you say, that boom or demographic dividend what can get, this could become a big liability. So that's one thing we need to see, that if you see the stunting numbers, again Pakistan is green and Bangladesh is red and India is blue. The problem with this, in since 2010, your stunting indicators have worsened. The percentage of population of kids who are stunted has increased in Pakistan. That's a big worry. That's a time when the population poverty is declining, the GDP is growing. How come stunting issues can increase in Pakistan? That's a big problem. And that's one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest challenges the country has today. They're like, we have like the 4th highest number of kids going out of the school in Pakistan. And those kids, and many of those kids are not physically and mentally healthy. Now, when they come into the workforce, would they ever be joining workforce? Would they become a liability? How can we answer to those kids when they become youth? We are responsible for their problem today. And we need to address that before it becomes a problem that is far from being solvable. So that's one area. If you see India and Bangladesh, they're improving much more into that, but Pakistan is doing very bad in that. And same are the indicators of the wasting and all that. I haven't really, have this. Now, let's talk about the dichotomy, the paradox, the irony which I'm talking about, that the population, poverty is falling in Pakistan, but the nutrition indicators are worsening. Why is that? Okay, I go back to 2008. Again, Pakistan used to have, let me narrate a story in a minute, which is not there in numbers, that Pakistan used to have a direct food subsidy for farmer. We used to have a subsidy on the fertilizer in terms of cheaper gas, and the diesel prices were lower than the petrol, and it was cheaper for farmers and everything and all that. So the farmer cost was low and the produce price was not very high, and they were making money into that and all that. So the wheat price was Pakistan was 625 per 40 kg in 2006. After that, the international prices went up in 2008, and then it came down back again. But what we came up with that in 2008, when we were having a power crisis and all that, and we were giving a heavy subsidy on the circulated and everything, so we didn't have much of fiscal resources to provide the food subsidy. We decided to go away from the food subsidy mechanism. And what the PPP government, which has a ruler tilt at that point of time, what they did is they introduced a wheat support price mechanism. We increased the wheat price from 625 to 950 rupees in a go. And we never stopped back in that. And then ever since then, the prices has gone up. And the wheat is the staple food, and it has been used for any bakery item you use, you'll have wheat. Even if you drink milk, the fodder that the animal uses is coming up from the byproduct of the wheat. And so you go to any bakery item, you go to anything, it has an impact of the direct impact on the wheat. And if it is not a direct impact, the farmer makes choices accordingly, and it has impact on all the product of it. So the increase in the wheat price has cascaded into the food prices across the board. And that I think is one of the reasons why you see the indicators are moving that okay, $1.9, okay, there are less people under $1.9, but what we can afford in $1.9 when you have increased the wheat support price in this. Let's look at through the numbers. Let's see what the international price and what the prices are in India is. Now, again, this is the wheat price in Pakistan, in green, in blue, it is India, it's red, not Bangladesh is the international price. I shouldn't have been red and something else, but that's the world price, the international price, that's the US price. And if you see back in FY08, Indian price was slightly higher than the Pakistan price. Then we introduced the support price in Pakistan, and you see that Pakistan price is about 30% higher than India price. And ever since then, 25 to 30% price premium remain in Pakistan and India, and that could have been justified till FY14, since when the international prices were higher, so we could say that, okay, our prices are high, but now, since FY14, the international prices have came down significantly, but our wheat support price is there, and we have increased it by 50 rupees this year as well. Why? Why can't we move up to that? And we have a problem, another problem, that we have a wheat surplus in the country, which we can't export. I mean, that's another problem, but let me give you a half a minute explanation on that as well. Now, we have a surplus wheat, and they were like giving a subsidy of $50 per ton on that, we didn't export. We gave a subsidy of $100 per ton, we didn't export. Now, we're exporting, but maybe giving about $120, $150 per ton, and whatever we get, because the difference is high, and we export. So what we are doing is that we are subsidizing the foreign customer, that we are paying higher prices to the farmer, and who is going to benefit from that? International people. A poor country like Pakistan is supporting international people through this subsidy mechanism. How absurd it could be. So that's one thing, that's a very serious issue, that's something we need to look into very importantly, that the wheat support price has done some damage to Pakistan. Now what there is not in numbers, what I haven't seen that back in 2014, what the government came up with that, okay, that wheat support price is going great, let's introduce sugar support price as well. Now we have a sugar support price as well. And the similar story is on the sugar as well, that sugar price is higher in Pakistan than India and international. And similar stories of the sugar export subsidy as well. We've seen that we have exported the sugar and all that. We all know that who controls the sugar industry. It's politician, be it PPMLN, PPP, or whoever it is, or PTI. They all control the sugar industry. They all have the sugar mills. And when it comes to the decision of the sugar, they all have one point. So we have this sugar export subsidy, and that again, it's not an issue pertaining to this, but there is another externality of this giving a high support price on the sugar. What on sugar cane is that the farmer has moved from sugar cane to from cotton to sugar cane. So they both have grown at the same time. So it has multiple issues of moving from sugar cane to cotton. One is that cotton are our exporting industry. So we are producing less cotton, we are exporting less. We are exporting less, our foreign exchange reserves are falling. So we have become a vulnerability, and we may have to go to the IMF, we may have to create debt and all that, because we are exporting less. And why exporting less? Because we are producing more sugar cane and all that. That's one reason. So we need to look at that, what are the consequences of that. The other reason is that sugar cane is water intensive. So we are wasting water on that. And I tell you that going 20 years down the road, what we had a gas crisis 10 years back, you'll have a water crisis, and that would be deadly. So, but that's besides the point. And one of the issues of nutrition is, which I haven't really dealt into this, is the water as well. But that's not the point here. But yes, that's another area. So if we see this, the impact of the wheat support price that we introduced in 2008, if we see the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, that the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics compute that number, so it's a government number. So if the price of anything was 100 rupees in 2008, today it's about 230 rupees. So that tells you that have your income increased by between 2008 and all that? Their real wages haven't increased on that. So we are spending more on food or we are spending less on food. What would be required to do that? And the food inflation is even higher than the general inflation. That red line is food inflation. So that's something which is a great concern. So we need to reduce this food prices one way or the other. So that's very important. And if we go to the other thing, there's the malnutrition has an impact on mental growth. The damage in the first 2 years of a kid that cannot be, it's irreversible. You cannot regain on that, and that it has a learning ability, and you result in an healthy adult and a poor kid in school. And this would have an impact on productivity. And if you see this graph, again, it's between Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. Pakistan is green, India is blue, and Bangladesh is red. If you see the labor productivity of Pakistan, that was far higher than India. And now India is much more than us. It's not much more than us, but it's increasing. And Bangladesh is approaching us as well. So we are flat. India is moving up. Bangladesh is moving up, but our labor productivity is flat. And with the stunting issues increased in the past 5 years, what do you see this productivity to decline over the next 10-15 years? If we don't deal with the stunting issue, we would see this productivity to decline further. Nothing could be more serious than that from a lens of an economist and from a lens of a social scientist we have over there. So what kind of solution, just like to just deliberate a little bit on the solution and leave for the experts to talk more on that. Okay, the one thing from my presentation, we can assert that affordable food has to be there for the poor and the lower middle class. So food prices have to come down one way or the other. Now, what are the ways to do it? One way is to reintroduce food subsidy and do away with the wheat support price. That would have a fiscal implication. Another way is to provide food stamps. That would have a food implication. I would like Mavi to speak more on that. And or to enhance the portfolio of the Benazir income support program. So what is the way if you increase the BISP directly money, if you increase the food stamp under BISP, or you introduce the food, reintroduce the food subsidy like we have in India. India fertilizer is cheaper in Pakistan, diesel is cheaper in India, and other the pesticides and all other inputs, they are cheaper in India. We need to have a similar in that. So, but they all have a fiscal implication. With the low commodity price cycle we have, there is some fiscal room we have. So we need to look at the future generation. But before doing so, I would urge people around to do more research on the subject, to have more deliberation on that, and let's build up a debate on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Shwari sir. And for student researchers, there are several questions which are thrown to you. For example, the social inequality, political inequality, ethnic inequality, and now why stunting? Is it water or something else? Because we know that there are certain causes of there are certain damages to the society due to stunting and other malnourishment practices. But why? What are the causes of those malnourishment? These are the causes. These are the questions over to you, which you need to address. And moving forward to next speaker, who's two discussants, Shakil Saab and Mazhar Siraj Saab. And I would like to invite Mazhar Siraj first. He was a well-accomplished professional with 11 years of experience in designing, managing and delivering multi-sectoral high-impact development programs. Graduate from the University of Cambridge, UK. Mazhar has worked in senior managerial research and advisory roles with the Department of International Development, DFID, Save the Children, UK, Institute of Social and Policy Sciences, ISAP, and Consumer Rights Commission of Pakistan, CRCP. He has led multiple programs focusing on education, social development, access to justice, disaster risk management, human rights, and governance. Over to you, sir. And may I request you to be brief for 5 minutes? Really? Yeah.
I love the introduction, actually. Thank you very much. So I'm expected to comment on the presentations, and when I heard Anna's presentation, it basically reminded me of the time when I heard this phrase, leave no one behind, for the first time. And I thought, is it another catchphrase? Because development community is kind of notorious for inventing terms and jargon. And I thought maybe this is another jargon. And I tried to find out what this is all about. And if you look at its history, it's really very, very interesting. I mean, it has a military history, the term. Leave no one behind is English translation of a Latin phrase called nemo residuo. And the phrase has been in use for almost centuries, where military used this term to refer to the captives of wars. So they would say if the people are captured by their enemy, they would say we would not leave our men behind, and we would make every effort to go and rescue those people who are trapped. And how this term is applied to sustainable development goals, I think that really is all about making every effort to rescue the people who are trapped in poverty, in social exclusion, discrimination, and there are other protected characteristics like age, ethnicity, but these are different traps. And the whole idea is that we need to make an effort that we rescue these people, basically, from these traps. Now, Alexis's presentation, I think it really talks about one of those traps, which is malnutrition. And that is where our generations are in a vicious cycle of malnutrition. I think the presentation really raises a very interesting question. If poverty in Pakistan has declined, why malnutrition is still there, why nutrition indicators haven't improved. And I remember when the Planning Commission launched the new poverty estimates in early 2016, there was a lot of discussion about the same question, and there was no answer. And let's be honest that affordability of food, our food intake is just one element. Nutrition is much more complicated to tackle. I mean, food quality, water and sanitation, the impact of hygiene, the honesty, in all honesty, I think let's admit that we don't know answer to this puzzle, to be honest. I mean, wheat price could be one plausible way of explaining why indicators haven't improved, but I think we really don't know the answer, and that, I think, is a big question for think tanks like STPI to research more. Dr. Sharia's presentation, I think, it also touches on a very interesting aspect, that is social exclusion and youth. But if I would like to kind of club all three presentations and see what are the common themes and what we think about those. I think extreme poverty and inequality is one, and the population is another one. Now, if you look at the extreme poverty and inequality, which are central to leave no one behind, I think everyone agrees that extreme poverty has declined since 1975 in the whole of Asia. So the bulk of population which was below the poverty line has now moved up the extreme poverty that we know, and some economists would call this the Asian miracle, because the reduction is dramatic. And this is mainly led by East Asia and China. But we still, in South Asia, of course, there are significant gaps, but of course there are still kind of big numbers of people who are living below poverty line. So the current estimates are roughly between 293 to 300 million people in South Asia living below poverty line currently, which I think is if you look at the scale, this is a big number which basically poses a lot of social policy questions, which I would come to in a minute. And this number actually, it ignores the vulnerabilities, the people who are slightly above the poverty line, and they could fall back into poverty with one single shock. they are not counted in this number. Asian Development Bank did some work and they estimated that 12% population roughly in Asia is vulnerable. So if you add another 12% to this 300 million people in South Asia, is a big number. So if you look at the poverty reduction trends, I think the main thing is we have something to celebrate. I mean, we should not be really very cynical and kind of portray the conservative picture, because otherwise we would lose hope. We should really celebrate that the poverty is coming down, but at the same time, I think this gain is kind of glossing over the main issue, which is inequality and relative deprivation. Now, the projections which some economists have done, they show that by 2030, most of the Asia would be free of extreme poverty, led by East Asia, but South Asia would be very close in terms of extreme poverty reduction. It would be very close. But if you look at relative deprivation, and that is where I think Dr. Sharia's presentation and all other presentations they point to, is deprivation in education, in health, in nutrition, social indicators, they are not moving very fast. So I think South Asia's biggest challenge would remain, one, how do we fast track poverty reduction in the region? That is one. The other is, how do we tackle social inequality in the region? So inequality would remain a big challenge. I think in a way, South Asia is winning war against poverty, but it's losing war against social inequality, because we don't see a narrative emerging out from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, these major countries, how they would be tackling inequality. I just want to leave 3 questions which I think really are important for social policy in South Asia. Now, if India, Pakistan, they have to make progress, they really need to prioritize. And I think that is one key message I take from Amina's presentation, is about prioritization and fast tracking, because otherwise leave no one behind is about everyone. Universality is at the center of this concept. It's about everyone. It's not just about poverty. You would have people who are not poor, but they are left behind on the basis of their identity, gender, on the basis of caste, on the basis of their location. But extreme poverty and inequality are central, because if you are living in a country which is low income country or low or middle income country, prioritization really becomes important, because you have issues around fiscal space. So really the first question, social policy question for this region is, do we know who are left behind? It's very easy to target or categorize people into disabled people, into widows, into women and girls, into elderly. These are kind of well-known categories to development professionals. But really, do we know that who are the people who are left behind and where do they live? I personally believe that South Asia really needs a data revolution. And when I say data revolution, it means 3 things. One, we need more data on a number of indicators in a number of areas where we don't know much. Disability is one, child labor is another one. Nutrition, for example, we have some indicators, but we take 6-7 years to do another survey. We really are short of data on that. So production of more data, but I think it's also disaggregating that data, but also aggressive use of this data to make policies is really crucial for the whole region. And I think Pakistan is very lucky that we have this Benazir Income Support Program's National Socioeconomic Registry, which gives you plenty of data on key indicators, 27 million households. The program is currently updating the data. And I think the update actually, I think we are even better position, because the data would be geotagged. You could actually locate the household, and if you would like to find out, okay, who is deprived of education, health. I expect that Madam Chairperson would talk about that more. The second question for South Asian policymakers is whether the public expenditure is doing well to tackle the issue of inequality. Given the geographical inequalities and given that particular groups are excluded from social services, and my question is probably not, because we see that in Pakistan you could think about geographical exclusion, for example, certain areas, even within same district, you see those disparities. And I think that is why redistribution policies are going to be extremely important. And that is where the role of social safety nets, social protection is going to be very, very important. Now, in Pakistan, of course, we have BIS, which is performing this function redistribution to the poorest. We know that that is making some difference. We know that impact evaluations show really, really encouraging results. But at the moment, the whole sector, such social protection sector itself is kind of fragmented, and provinces would also need to play a role. And the same applies to India, Bangladesh, definitely. The third question, which is very important, and which I think is a common thread in our presentation, is the question of population. India is very likely to take over China in the next 7 to 10 years in terms of population. It would be the largest, biggest country in terms of population in the world. It's already very close. And I think that, despite that India has pretty sustainable economic growth, it has solid democratic foundation, probably, maybe some people would disagree with me, but I think the pressure it would bring on jobs, on employment, on food security is going to be a big one. Pakistan, we know we have this recent census. I think the same question for us, fertility reduction, is going to be extremely important. And what do we do about human capital, job-intensive growth? I think these are going to be key priorities. The whole point is, I think for the whole region, the key question is, what is the narrative on population that we have? What is government's vision? What they do? What do they want to do with this big population which is growing, and you have young population? I think these three questions, one is about data, the second is about how do we promote equitable spending and redistribution so that the poorest, they are protected from shocks and don't fall back into poverty. And the third one is the question of population, which I think governments need to think about. I was asked to share some thoughts about what DFID is doing on this, but I think I should leave that for question and answer session. If people have questions, I can answer that. I would stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu sir. Moving forward, we are running out of time as well because we still have 3 discussants. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Shakil Ahmed, who has around 18 years of experience in the development sector, project development, public policy, with substantive expertise on the issues of poverty, microfinance, gender equality, and broader governance and institutional development. And now he's leading the team from UNDP on the SDGs as well. He is part of UNDP Pakistan Senior Management Team and Chief Development Policy Unit, and recently he has done Development Management degree from London School of Economics.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you again to STPI for having us and for having UNDP in this panel. I would very quickly comment on the presentation, the excellent presentation which were made, and I start with Amina's presentation. I think and one of the issues which Amina also raised was the issue of how we define exclusion, and also, how we come up with a kind of definition in the context of leaving no one behind. If you look at the kind of definitions or the kind of approaches which are available right now, they may not cover the issues related to, for example, disability, indigenous population, and other groups. We use Gini coefficient as a measure of inequality. But then, in a country like Pakistan, we have issues with data. We don't have the full information on incomes. So that is one of the constraints that I see, that how you define it. And secondly, as Mazhar also mentioned, that then where do you get the data? We know that Benazir income support programs, the poverty data is very rich. But then that's data which is collected after a few years. But if you look at the PCLM data, which is collected by PBS after 2 years at the district level, I don't think that it covers most of the kind of data which might be required for this kind of analysis. So one is I think I just put it on the table, the issue of like how we define it and then how we collect data for that. The second issue is that if we have, what are the kind of solutions? So we did this report with the Planning Commission on the status of multidimensional poverty in Pakistan, and we use that as a proxy to assess the issue of inequality in terms of poverty across the country, and we map different districts according to the multidimensional poverty index. And we found that, even in provinces which are comparatively better at the aggregate level, like Punjab, there are districts which are very poor as compared to other districts. So, for example, the southern districts, Muzaffargarh, Rajanpur, the multidimensional poverty is as high as 64% as compared to the multidimensional poverty in Lahore, which is around 4%. Then, we also look into some of the issues that why is so. And I would like to kind of touch upon two issues. And one was, which was already mentioned about public investment, public expenditures. I did some kind of analysis for my personal work, and I found that if you look at the annual development plan for 2016-17 of Punjab, you will find that of the total annual development plan allocation, which is around 550 billion rupees, 18% goes to Lahore. Whereas Muzaffargarh, which is the poorest in terms of the multidimensional poverty, they would get around 0.56%. If you do this kind of analysis and if you kind of try to measure the per poor allocation, you will find that in Lahore, the per poor allocation is around 634,000 rupees, whereas in Muzaffargarh, it would be around 3,000 rupees. Similarly, if you try to kind of measure the per poor allocation of health and education expenditure, you will come up with kind of same figures. So, for example, in Lahore, the per poor allocation on health and education, it would be around 29,000 rupees, whereas in Muzaffargarh, it is around 1,500 rupees. So, one issue is that, how we allocate resources, and that is a more of a public investment question, and that is an issue that the government has to look into. Now, how we do that? One approach is perhaps to look into the Provincial Finance Commission. Now, Punjab, for example, again, just to give the example of Punjab, they have an interim Provincial Finance Commission award. But if you look into the nitty-gritties of that award, you will find that, so as I mentioned, 550 billion rupees is the total size of the annual development plan. The net divisible pool, which is used to allocate, to make allocation to districts, district government, according to the interim finance PFC, it is around 337 billion. So you see that the denominator is quite quite different. Secondly, if you look again into the interim PFC, you will find that 82% of the total allocation goes to salaries. That is the current cost, and the government has to bear that cost in any case. Around 11% goes to development, and that is the formula-based allocation. The second issue I would like to mention here is that one is the public investment, the government investment, but the second, perhaps second question would be that how we bring private investment in those areas which are lagging behind. For example, southern districts of Punjab or Quetta, the districts in Balochistan and others. I think in that case as well, again, if you look at the kind of the distribution of poverty, you would see that the districts which are far away from markets, they are more poor as compared to districts which are close to the capitals or to the federal capital. Now that basically means that the more you are away from markets, the more poor you are. And Amin also mentioned that, and I think that basically kind of underline the importance of connectivity. Now there are two perhaps maybe two options. One is that how you connect poor people to markets, and secondly how you develop markets in closer to those areas which are poor. And one of the, and I think this was a suggestion which Dr. Mehboob al-Haq had given some time back, was that you have these more provinces or more kind of autonomous regions, and as you develop these not autonomous, but mostly like locally governed regions, you will have all those social services you have to make available. You would need health services, education services, and when the government make investment in these kind of services, you also develop markets. So there has been discussion on more provinces, but that is more of a political discussion. But I think that is also one of the options one can look into. Coming to Shahryar's presentation, I think there is no debate on the importance of governance. and also he also mentioned about, weak governance leading to conflict. But I would also say that, conflict also leads to poor governance, and that also had impact on poverty. Very quickly coming to Ali, his presentation, I think that was very interesting, especially like when you look into the issue of affordability. So as the way we define access to food security, it has three dimensions, as we know. One is availability, the second is accessibility, and the third is absorbability. I think Ali mentioned, he kind of, underlined the importance of affordability, but I think equally important is the issue of absorbability. And that is a more technical one, like, how you measure absorbability, and for that you need to have medical tests, and there you also depend on micronutrients and, the kind of mix, the quality of food, and Mazhar also referred to that. So when we look into the issue of malnutrition and stunting, I think we should kind of take a more holistic approach to that and see that, what are how these three components kind of work together. Second, he talked about the role of support prices, but my question would be that, support prices are provided to stimulate production. That is basically an incentive which is provided to farmers so that they can grow wheat. Now, my question would be that if you would not have that support prices, what would have been the impact on production? I don't know, but that is just kind of a question which came to my mind. And we also know that, the Cobweb theorem in agriculture, where when you provide, support prices, there's this kind of, they stimulate production in the subsequent year. So I think that is also an issue which should be looked into. I agree with your point, is that there is a kind of, disconnect between income poverty and non-income poverty. And I think that is a phenomena which is quite unique to Pakistan, where the income poverty is very low, but, the non-income poverty, the multidimensional poverty, or malnutrition and all those things, on that Pakistan has quite a huge issue. And if you compare it, Pakistan, with Bangladesh, as well as with Nepal and other countries, you would see, like, for example, in Bangladesh, the multidimensional poverty is lower than income poverty. So I think there comes the failure of the social policy in the country. How you basically focus on the social issues and social indicators. Why has the income poverty declined in Pakistan? While, there are a lot of debate on that. But I think, my own assessment is that it is because of the markets. It is because of the informal economy that we have. Some estimates suggest that informal economy in Pakistan is as big as 70% to 90% of the total economy. I think that's the same. And second is the role of remittances, the remittances that we get from abroad. And I think that these are also the reason in Nepal, because Nepal does not have the kind of a growth which would reduce poverty, but, it has reduced poverty. So I think moving forward, we should also, and very finally, on the issue of productivity, labor productivity, I agree that stunting would have an impact on productivity, but then again, we have to kind of, be cognizant of the thing that we are talking about different brackets of age, we are talking about different age brackets. So like, the labor force, it has a higher age bracket as compared to, people who are being stunted. Obviously, it has an impact on that, but I think it has to be shown through evidence. And also, I think productivity, perhaps it's also because we do not invest much in skill development, because Pakistan is a huge skill development game. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shakil Saab. And now I would like to invite Dr. Abid Karim Solari.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be very brief because I'm more interested to hear from Madam Chairperson Bisp. Thank you, all the panelists. I'll just touch upon a couple of issues. Amina's point, leaving no one behind, and looking at some of the groups which are structurally left behind is extremely important. And the reason is, when we are talking of averages, or when we're talking of poverty lines, poverty bands, so what happens if this is the poverty band or poverty line, and I'm a policy maker, I'll be inclined to somehow make my interventions here so that I can get some of the people jumped up here, and I can claim that people they have graduated from poverty line, and this group it always remained neglected. In our case, BISP is slightly exceptional, where due to a poverty scorecard, we are able to focus on the lower strata, but it's only about the income poverty. The multidimensional poverty index and the approach that Planning Commission has adopted now, again, the people living on lower strata and multidimensional poverty, they are getting ignored, and we need to somehow focus upon them. And if we don't focus upon them, what happen, and I keep on forwarding this hypothesis, which I call insecurity breeds insecurity. And my hypothesis is that the insecure individuals, when they get any sort of identity, be it ethnic identity, be it sectarian identity, provincial identity, any identity, and they find other group which is better off than them, there is immediate clash and there is immediate chances of conflict. And we can say that the group A belonging to certain ethnicity or belonging to certain province is being exploited by group B, who belongs to other ethnicity or who belongs to other province. So in order to, especially in the context of South Asia, which is already extremely polarized, I think for social harmony, it's important to identify those groups and to bring them in the mainstream. The second point that I wanted to talk upon, and I think Shakil has already mentioned, there is no direct link between income poverty graduation and malnutrition. If most of us, we go for our vitamin D deficiency test, so those who are not getting exposed to sunlight, they would be vitamin D deficient, and we would have to take some sort of supplements, because our lifestyle, especially the people sitting in this room, our lifestyle is such that we are not getting enough daylight. So similarly, it's about habits, our food habits. If I say that most of you are sitting here belonging to the above average the income groups, the children, our children, they are so addicted to chocolates and fast foods. Again, you will find them that they would be malnourished even if they don't be counted as poor. So we need to somehow focus on food habits, and we need to focus on the nutrition aspect of it. The final thing, what can be done, and we gave this proposal in People's Party government, Zero Hunger program, and our proposal was that at the time of creation of Ministry of Food Security and Research, that BISP and Ministry of Food Security and Research, they should somehow work in close harmony. Food security can't be achieved unless and until we cater the two other pillars of it. It's not only the food production, it is availability of food, socioeconomic access to food, and third is food absorption, which means health, which means clean drinking water, which means sanitation, and which means education as well. It couldn't happen at that time. Maybe now BISP should float a program, and the food security should be part of the BISP income recipients. Ensuring their food security would mean giving them some sort of food vouchers, taking care of especially the food requirement of breastfeeding mothers and the expecting mothers, because most of the time you will find them either they have iron deficiency or they would have other nutritious deficiency, and we need to have some sort of a program to work with them. And finally, we need to somehow consolidate different social safety net program, maybe under BISP or under any other title you want to say them. Right now we have around 16 to 17 social safety net programs, starting from Baitul Mal and Zakat and Usher and Social Security, etc., etc. So Finance Minister 2 years ago, it constituted a task force. I was also part of that task force, enhancing effectiveness of social safety program. And our recommendation was that instead of spreading our resources too thinly and non-targeted, maybe we should focus on one central agency, and we should somehow make all the spending on social safety net through that agency. Right now I can see that if BISP can be the central agency, and we can somehow synchronize other social safety net program through BISP, it would have more effect than rather than creating 15-20 other agencies which are spreading their resources too thinly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Abid. And now we are moving towards the interesting sessions of the panel discussion. Before the question answer session, I would like to invite the chair of the session, Ms. Maharbi Maimun, who is a member of National Assembly. She doesn't need any introduction, by the way. She has the status of Minister of the State since February 25, 2015, and she's serving as the chairperson of Benazir Income Support Program. She was graduated from London School of Economics with BSc Honours in 1993 in International Relations, and after that she has she was remained as a member of several committees in the Parliament. She was advisor to the President on the media management. She has wrote author of Parliamentary Diaries, My Diaries, published in 2012, and she's right now chairperson of Benazir Income Support Program, and she was a member of parliamentary committees on the environment, information technology, and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan. Over to you, ma'am.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to thank SDPI for this invitation. It's an important subject and it's very relevant to what BISP is doing, and I love the tagline. And Mazhar, yeah, some of them are not so great, but this one I absolutely adore, leave no one behind. So, of course, the SDGs are all about that. But what about Pakistan? Pakistan is all about that too, and the government of Pakistan is all about that too, whether you like it or not. Let me give you a bit of good news as a government person. In 2008, the government of Pakistan started the Benazir Income Support Program, and the idea was exactly this, leave no one behind. And I think the fact that the largest social safety net of Pakistan was created in 2008 and has, as a result, expanded in a new government with a new political party, that says a lot for this commitment of not leaving anyone behind. Now, of course, we were talking about who is it who gets left behind very easily in our society. People like widows, of course, and when I take all these little sort of segments of society, of course, BISP is dealing with all these segments. So I'm very pleased to say that as far as BISP is concerned, we have a focus on this. Whether it's widows, whether it's children, women specifically, the elderly, disabled, minorities, etc., rural plus urban, not just rural. Poverty exists in rural and urban sites. So all of these elements and these segments of society have a tendency to get left behind, but as far as the Benazir Income Support Program is concerned, it has a targeting methodology, and I think we were talking about the prioritization. So when we talk about prioritization, we're talking about how we are targeting. You are all aware, so I'm not going to go into the history of how BISP started the targeting. It was on political basis. Thank God that ended in 2010. And after that, a survey was launched. And after that, it's been scientific targeting. It's been scientific prioritization of not leaving those who are the most vulnerable in this society behind. An important point which BISP can take credit for and is the fact that as far as the identity of all these women are concerned, they need an ID card. And when they get an ID card, only then can they get a BISP benefit or a BISP stipend. That, of course, helps us in terms of the political dispensation of this country, that they are now in a position that they're automatically on the electoral lists, whereas in the past they weren't. So there was a lot of hue and cry when this came up and when this was made a condition to getting a stipend. But I am very glad to say that at that point everyone put their foot down and they actually insisted that whether women were in the most backward rural parts of the country or they were in the not so rural parts of the country, everyone needed an ID card. With the result that the Benazir Income Support Program has recently received the Democracy Award from the UK House of Commons. And basically it was for one of the reasons was this, that we were ensuring that the vulnerable women were part of the electoral system. I want to talk about the demographic directory because as far as your poverty mapping is concerned, and I'm kind of going through chronologically the way the presentations are, because I was taking notes, so I'm going through chronologically the whole presentations that have come up. Excellent presentations, all of them. You showed a bit of poverty mapping here. The Benazir Income Support Program has, as a result of its National Socioeconomic Registry, done a demographic profile of each district. It's available on our website. You should be using it. And we have done poverty mapping for the entire country, district by district. So we also have not just a fairly good idea, we have a fairly exact idea of this poverty map. The trouble is, I don't think it's used enough, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. We talked about social inequality, and I think the implications are not just for youth, but in terms of generally wherever there's inequality and there's discrimination, there's hatred and there's violence, and that's a very natural phenomena. I would not say that the Benazir Income Support Program has handled that to a large extent, because of course I would need statistics to prove that, and I don't think we have measured all of that. But certainly wherever there has been, wherever you go in the country, in the smallest areas and in the most difficult terrains of Pakistan, BISP officers are found, BISP officers are found, BISP stipends are being given, and that to me is a positive sign. Ladies and gentlemen, because if you look at those areas which have politically been left out perhaps of the larger frame of the larger Pakistaniyat concept, or who are more exposed to inequalities, who feel more discriminated against, if BISP is available in those areas and is giving the Pakistani social contract to those individuals, that's a start. My whole approach on that is, I think we have started that journey when I say that in Avaran we are available, in Dera Bukti we are available, we are giving stipends there. I have personally visited those areas many times. Whether I personally as chairperson BISP am satisfied with the service levels, no, of course I'm not, because I feel that our service levels need to increase specifically in those areas where there has been a traditional sense of deprivation or a traditional sense of discrimination due to whatever political policies or whichever political government, not getting into the specifics of it. So I feel that as an organization which is the largest social safety net, we have a bigger responsibility to ensure that the service levels increase over there. We're doing absolutely everything possible under the bureaucratic situation possible to increase the service levels there. And frankly, we have some good news over there too. For example, places like these, places like Musa Khel, we are running the Wasile Taleen conditional cash transfer program there, not just the unconditional plus the conditional program. So when you see 1+1, meaning the unconditional plus the conditional transfers in such difficult terrains, I think it reduces hopefully the inequalities, and it has a certain implication for increasing the Pakistaniyat over there. I think I would like to offer the database for research purposes, because certain research was done and certain research was presented this afternoon to all of you. I think one should do a research specifically on BISP families, how they have been affected in certain areas, and in the same area, non-BISP families, and then compare inequalities so that you really understand whether BISP has created an impact. I mean, I believe it has. We have an impact evaluation studies that happen regularly, periodically, which are up on our website, which show these impacts. But I think in terms of social inequalities, especially on the youth, because when we talk about families, when we talk about women, of course their families are involved and their children are involved. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of data you come up with, and I think we would like to promote such kind of researches so that you can come up with some positive data on that front. Now, it is clear that the voice of the youth is the loudest in this day and age. You cannot suppress it. That's the good news, ladies and gentlemen. The other good news is that BISP has a network where you can get to hear these voices more regularly. It's called the famous BISP Beneficiary Committees. We have, from our 5.4 million women, about 1.7 million women are part of these committees. So as far as youth voices are concerned, in order to gauge how they feel about different services, this is a database that you have access to. And mostly in these committees, I would agree, they have many severe issues about local government disconnects or services which are not being provided at the level that they expect. And the expectations of youth have increased over time as a result of better media penetration, as a result of better communication, as a result of more activity within Parliament, outside Parliament, etc., etc. So here's a chance for all of you to come and research all of that with us. I was also going to give you a bit of statistics in terms of how much we have spent in terms of poverty management in the last, since 2008. About 539 billion rupees have been spent in the last, since 2008, and now we have about over 5.4 million women customers. and 4.8 billion have been spent on Wasile Taaleem. So if you add the two of them, you get to a significant number. This is not a small commitment by the governments of Pakistan over the period, two different governments. And of course, we take the largest share. We have doubled, we have increased. So we have shown a massive expansion in this program, of course. In terms of poverty numbers, we have within our subset, I'm not here to give the Planning Commission numbers, that's their job. They discuss poverty going down or whatever, that's their purview, I don't interfere in that. But certainly within our subset, within our community of BIS beneficiaries, there is a percentage decrease in terms of poverty reduction, and that has been publicly announced many a times, about 10 to 11%. So that is something significant. But I think what will be more interesting, and I think the fact that I've got certain partners of mine sitting on the stage right now, and we're all eagerly looking at those numbers, is that when our new survey comes in, because the survey that was done was in 2010, and you have access to that gold mine. But I'm offering you a double gold mine in fact in December hopefully. And that gold mine will then establish, at least for 10 districts, a comparison that in these 10 districts, 7 years later, how many people have exited poverty and how many have not. That will be also an eye-opener, and I hope a positive eye-opener. I'm not willing to give any predictions on that one right now. The numbers will speak for themselves, and we will go public on them hopefully before the end of this year, and hopefully before New Year's there will be some good news on that. That as a result of BISP interventions or as a result of government policy, generally on poverty alleviation, because remember BISP is only step one. A social safety net is the first step on that ladder of poverty alleviation. There's many other programs, whether it's microcredit, health programs, etc., insurance, the rest of it. But we are the number one on that ladder, and the really important, big number one. There are many others who then take you to the graduation out of poverty. It'll be interesting to see how many people have actually exited from our ultra poor, from our poor, and from our lists, and how many of them we will not be servicing in the future. I also want to talk to you about malnourishment, a subject extremely close to my heart. I think I completely agree with the presentation that has been made. I'm not going to make excuses for it. As government, I am not happy with the situation. I think we have declared a war on stunting and malnourishment. And if we haven't, then I think we should. As far as I'm concerned, we have. And I remember this was discussed in a cabinet meeting a year back when the World Bank chief was here, World Bank president was here as well. So worldwide there's a war on stunting. Pakistan is part of that. Pakistan does not have very good numbers to report on that. I'm not going to comment on why the poverty numbers are coming down and the stunting numbers are going up, but yes, I think it's an awareness issue, I think it's a training issue, and I certainly agree with Abid Saab that I think there is something lacking in there. Now, what is BIS doing about it? Because I'm not going to sit here and complain. When you're sitting in government, your job is not to complain, your job is to give solutions and explain what you've done and to talk about the challenges of the future. So as far as I'm concerned, the Benazir Income Support Program has started this year, thank God, within its BIS beneficiary committees, a system of training on nutrition. Now, if we are training the most vulnerable part of our population, I think it's a big start. It's going to create a big impact. I don't think it's a small impact. And these women in the BIS beneficiary committees are being trained on nutrition. They're being trained on how to utilize the same food better. They're being trained on what to eat, how to eat. So it's not just a question of whether the food availability is there. It's the way that the food is actually utilized. It's the way whether they choose to give their, a small example of whether they choose to give their children crisps and junk food with the same amount of money versus something nutritional. It's all about training. It's all about education. It's not just about the availability of resources. Remember, when we're talking about a cash versus, I think, some food stamps, you wanted my opinion on that. I'm just going to say that internationally it has been proven that when you give cash stipends in terms of a social safety net, you give a choice to the beneficiaries as to what they intend doing. On certain months, they wish to buy wheat. On certain months, they wish to buy clothing. And in certain cases, they wish to buy stuff for their children in terms of schooling. So that choice in terms of where they wish to put their money is extremely important. And we have seen it work exceptionally well in Pakistan. I've given you numbers of how the poverty has reduced within my subset, but also in terms of the flexibility that cash stipends give. Worldwide research has proved beyond doubt that it is the best way forward in terms of the first step. Remember, I am being very categorical about the first step. We at the Benazir Income Support Program do not say that we are the complete solution to poverty alleviation. We are the first massive step. There are many others, but we are the big ones. If you give $1.21 billion to BISP on a yearly basis, that's certainly not a small amount. It's a big, big number. Now, as far as the conclusion, hopefully I'm going to stick to my time and everyone's going to have lunch on time as well. The last but not the least, and the most important, we have right now data from about 10 districts on the new NSCR. It is gold mine, double gold mine. It is like Mazhar was discussing here, data which has been taken from iPads versus, so it's not forms, it's computerized, it's got GPS locations, it's geotagged. It is as best as we could do it. We have attempted to do a grand job in terms of world sort of standards. We have tried with World Bank DFID specifically to create an NSCR which compares exceptionally well with the rest of the NSCRs of the world. So this is not just data which, of course, Pakistan will be utilizing. This is data which is being looked at by other social safety nets on how they can improve their collection and targeting of poverty numbers as such. What I'm saying is that right now, we in December are in a process of creating an advisory council on how we intend to utilize that data. It has not been done in the past, and the way it has been done in the past is BISP gets the data, BISP uses it for giving stipends, and then BISP opens the door for other communities and other organizations and government departments to come and use that data. The health insurance program has used us, the Insaf card and PTI, KP government has done so. So there's many examples, there's a list of about 70 organizations. I'm not looking at just that. I'm looking at something bigger and something more meaningful for Pakistan, so that we can say that we have put together a group of researchers who are going to give us the best data mining solutions, perhaps, as to how this data technically should be used. What kind of development work should this data be used for? So that kind of intellectual work, I don't think has gone on in the past. We have just opened the doors, and then whoever decides to come in and takes that data, they do it. But we have not really guided. I think it's high time that we just don't collect data for our sake. We collect data for Pakistan's sake, and then we guide Pakistan a little bit as to how different government departments, for example, need to use us. So when Abid Saab was saying that, we are the umbrella, and that, yes, we are the ones who are the largest social safety net, etc., it is not just good enough being the largest social safety net of Pakistan. It is more important to show the way forward to the rest of the developing partners, to the rest of the developing NGOs or organizations or government departments as to how they can do their work better if they use our data. When we have not done this exercise in the last 2 years, and when we have been offering this database, I have noticed that it has not been utilized to its full potential. Therefore, we are putting together a group of top-notch research people of the country who will perhaps be in a better position to explain to Pakistan how best to utilize this data. I hope that people sitting in this room, as well as people watching through live streaming going on right now, will take us up on this and will be interested to utilize. So it's not just a question of university graduates sitting in some university in Pakistan utilizing this data, but it's everything. It's those individuals, it's organizations, and it's coming up with a complete answer to the developing needs of Pakistan. I think we do have an incredible chance to increase and improve within a short period of time utilizing this data. And I certainly hope that people will take us up on this offer. I wish you all the best for the rest of the conference. It seems like a very exciting couple of days for you, and I thank you for your invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And interestingly, we now have BISP data for everyone, and students can use it at different universities as well as the researchers at the different research departments. The floor is open and you can ask the questions. Be very specific, one-liner question if you can. Don't make it a paragraph thing. And we will start with, and please announce your name and where are you from. And
My name is Raja Masroor, and I'm Chief Foreign Aid and Planning and Development Department, Government of Sindh. I have two very brief comments. One, we need a constant flow of data, which is good, but we need to decide politically whether our development, particularly the human resource development, is going to be data-driven and demand-driven. It is not going to be political-driven. So that decision is very important at a broader level, one thing. And if I can add, we need constant data on the fertility rate as well. PSLM data comes after every 2 years, which is not sufficient for deciding the nutritional aspect of it. On the nutrition side, I have a very brief comment that it has something to do with the hidden hunger. It has something to do with the embryonic formation of a baby in the womb of a mother. So it has a lot to do with the poverty and the quality of food that mother takes. So thank you very much.
I am Usman Mustafa from Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. I think for data, particularly for the poverty and nutrition, we need a panel type of data. And there is no such type of data available, although PIDE has done some survey, but after a long time it has not continued that. So the importance of panel data is very much needed and required.
so, questions? Yeah, on this side.
Assalamu alaikum ji. My name is Shafaz Zahir. I'm from Finance Division. My question is from Dr. Shahriyar about youth employment. You had these parameters of social, institutional, and ethnic on exclusion. I wanted to ask you whether there was exclusion on the basis of gender. Did your research have that area covered? Thank you.
I'm Samanthi from Institute of Policy Studies, Sri Lanka. Thank you for everyone. You have done a very good job. So my question is to the person, the gentleman who discussed about nutrition. So I think that I'm looking at the experience in Sri Lanka. So you propose that giving food subsidies, particularly wheat flour. So is that the proper action that you can take to increase the nutrition status of the country? Because I'm asking that it's a kind of thing that it's solution driven, because you all are providing food subsidies and you all are thinking that food subsidies is the main reason that main factor that you can improve the nutrition status. But I think that you have to look at this in a holistic way. And in the other point is that if the wheat flour is fortified, I don't know that the what kind of wheat flour that you are using in Pakistan. If it is fortified, so there won't be any issue. But wheat flour is the refined one. You all have to think about whether improving the food subsidies is the main the solution. I will give some examples. In Sri Lanka, there is the small the community who living in the plantation sector. Their nutrition status are very poor compared to other the part of the country, because their staple food is the wheat flour. So, but the government is providing, Ministry of Health is providing lot of, that plenty of food subsidies and the nutrition programs. But the nutrition status, malnutrition, particularly the micronutrient deficiencies are stagnant. The one reason that we found last year is we haven't think about their culture. When we are proposing the solutions, particularly on nutrition issues, you have to think about the people's culture. By looking at that, you have to address the question. Don't go solution-driven program. You should think about problem-driven programs. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Thank you very much, and I would like to appreciate Mr. Shakil for highlighting this public expenditures, for which I think we have been seeing that most of the districts in Pakistan are left behind because of the resources. And we know that this NFC award was launched in 2010, and later on, this is the first time in any of the conference and in the meeting I've been hearing about the distribution of wealth. So my question is whether this is the constitutional requirement to hold provincial finance commissions every year, and if it is, so why our governments are not doing that?
We'll ask our presenters to answer the questions, and then we'll go back to the floor again. Okay, one question from Dr. Alia.
I think picking up on the spirit of the theme of the session, that leaving no one behind, I would like to ask a question from my student actually, who's in charge of the SDG unit at the Planning Commission, is working there, that has the government of Pakistan considered making a roadmap from the SDG goals to the chosen SDG indicators, and then linking it with possible interventions or policies that have historically known to have an impact on that particular indicator? Because I think we all, thanks to the political ownership of the SDG agenda, we are all now aware of, what really is lacking in terms of reaching to a point where no one is left behind. Now the big question is, how do we travel that journey? So I would appreciate, Ali, if you could illuminate us on that. Thank you.
So can we ask our presenters to respond to the questions? Starting from...
I'll respond to your question. The gender response was even more adverse when we looked at the data in terms of satisfaction with basic services, but also with employment opportunities, because these women had to travel a long distance for further education. They could not do that because of the lack of universities and higher education facilities in their area. They were more reliant on skill development programs, because that was the only way of trying to access some kind of employment in this particular area. And also, what was more apparent in the data was the lack of the kind of a power that they would like to have, independence of women in terms of accessing formal employment. And I think it has to do with some certain cultural dynamics of that area, that women get married at an early stage. And I think that is one of the dominating factors in some of these areas, particularly when you go towards the FATA and those districts. But that doesn't really mean that that they're not allowed to pursue employment. It also shows that we need to have more employment opportunities in those particular areas, linking them more with the institutions, with universities and higher education, because that sort of depresses the demand for employment, and the women are unable to seek more higher education, and then they try to diversify employment opportunities less from formal sector towards the informal sector.
On the question of PFC being a constitutional requirement, I don't think that is a constitutional requirement, but I think it's nevertheless it's a good governance practice, and it's something which is required for promoting equality and for equal distribution of resources. But what I was trying to also say is that there is politics behind that as well. You might have a PFC on the face of it, but then, when you get into the details of it, then, you would see that that is more of something which is just there, but, it does not have that kind of a meat which is required.
So I would like to, give you a bit of brief of the background of my presentation. It was primarily on the the missing macronutrients and missing micronutrients. Since the time was 10-12 minutes, I omitted a few slides before I gave it to the team, and then last night I sat with Amna and we further reduced it to the few slides. So I'm not saying that the issue of the micronutrient is not important, and the fortification is much more important, and I leave the fortification point to Mazhar to talk more about it. But what I wanted to have this fine point that which has not been discussed at many places is the affordability of food is there. Yes, the issue of the sanitation is there. Yes, the issue of the water quality is there. Yes, the issue of the food quality is there. Yes, the issue of the malnutrition of mother is there. And if I go back to that, even malnutrition of the teenage girls are there. Even I was talking to someone in the discussion, that's the most important thing to have, we should feed our teenager girls that they'll be the future mother and all that. But coming to my point is this is one area we would like to discuss and we would like to talk about and for those. Then the other point which Shakil talked about is that the productivity is not purely related to the stunting and everything, and if it is to the future, yes, but if you see this, our productivity is being flattened for the past 25 years or so. So the stunting problem there has an impact on that. Yes, skill set has an impact on that as well, but that's what I'm saying. More research is required in that. But that one factor you can't single out. And coming to the support price, why is the support price for productivity? Again, that was the point of the Shakil, but that's very important. But I'm not against the support price. Even when I compare the numbers of the India, that was again the India has a support price as well. And I am for we need to grow more wheat because it's a staple food and it's a very important element for the food security. But my point is that what we did in 2008, we introduced this support price at comparable to international prices, which are very low now as compared to what they were in 2008, to support the farmer, to have certain margins to sustain, to produce wheat and other products as well. Now my point is that farmer margin is very important. Farmers should have that incentive to grow wheat and other products. So, but what we decided to that, instead of giving a direct subsidy, as in the case of India, we provided as a higher price to the farmer. But when you get this higher price to the farmer, the problem with the non-farmer poor, they can't afford it. So that's a problem we didn't deal with. And within the farmer community, the politicization of the issue is this. The guinea bag, the bardana, which we gave to the farmer, many times the middleman, Aarti, takes advantage of it. That's another area of concern on that, the corruption and everything and all that. So we need to look into that very carefully. That okay, we are giving incentive to farmer, but that's an externality on the non-farmer as well. So what we need to probably do is we provide farmer a different incentive. An incentive, yes, we have to give an incentive to farmer, but in a different form that would not affect the marginalized. Now, before I get the floor to Mazhar for fortification, I just give you an example of salt iodization. Again, that was a part of my slide. Salt iodization when started back in somewhere in late 90s. In 2001, the salt iodization was 2% of the total salt in that, and deficiency of the iodization was 63% of the population. Today, we have 23% salt that's iodized, and the deficiency is reduced to 2%. So it has a great impact. And the wheat, and there is a study on the wheat fortification that the cost is about $0.5 billion and its benefit is somewhere $2.5 to $3 billion. And I'll leave Mazhar to talk more on that.
So, sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
Just 30 seconds, because the question was specifically about fortification, wheat flour fortification. Just to plug salt and cooking oil have been the kind of favorite products for fortification in Pakistan, but DFID has recently initiated a program which is for wheat flour fortification. So it would be about vitamin A and zinc. But the challenge is, we're working with formal wheat flour mills. There is a challenge how we reach the rural population which consumes kind of informal chakki flour.
Thank you. Thank you. The participants and the audience who are there, and we will leave for lunch now and see you at the next session at 3. So thank you very much.